Now, there's been a few questions about how I sharpen the larger blades like this, especially the one that have significant curvatures on them. There's not much to it. Same principles as any kind of sharpening. Apex to bevel, bring the two sides to a point, and then refine that actual point. So the first step is shaping, second step is sharpening. Now, I like to keep my large blades sharp enough so they can cut very light vegetation. Grasses, weeds, that type of deal. If a knife can slice a piece of fine newsprint very easily without tearing it, it's usually sharp enough to do the vegetation cutting. Now, of course, the reason that you use the paper testing is because you don't want to go outside every time you're tuning up your knife, just to make sure that you got that acceptable level of sharpness. And some people tend to get a bit confused because when you're cutting paper with a knife to check it, they seem to think that you're cutting paper because you want the knife to cut paper for the sake of cutting paper. And again, it's just a check on sharpness. It's not like I actually use the Caine Survival Tool in paper crafting in general. So I'm going to start off with an 8000 grit stone, which is rather fine, but I've only been using this knife for chopping on wood and I haven't hit anything, and the edge only has one small piece of damage, which is about right here, where I hit a piece of concrete that was in the surface of the wood. And that happens because I cut a lot of construction scrap, so there's a piece of concrete left and I put a bit of damage on the edge. Now, I'm not going to grind every bit of the edge down just to get rid of that, so when I do cut the piece of paper, I'll probably snag right there. I just want a nice smooth cut over the majority of the blade, and that little tiny blunt spot will just skip over the grasses if I go to cut it on it. Now, the reason I'm starting off with a very fine stone is, again, because I've only been chopping rather clean wood. I don't expect the knife to be overly blunt, so I'm just going to do a little bit of work on the stone and see where it gets me. So this is an 8000 grit water stone. It's what they call splash and go. It doesn't actually absorb a lot of water, so there's really no point to soaking it. And again, all I'm going to do is keep the edge of the knife perpendicular to the stone, so it's rather simple to do. But you got to work it in sections because the curvature changes. Let's work it a bit. Now, this is extremely awkward due to the camera angle. You normally wouldn't do it like this, but so you can see the stone is picking up metal rather quickly, and again, that's because this is a simple carbon steel. There's no large amounts of alloy carbides in it, so it'll grind rather easily even on this fine stone. And I suspect that this has got the edge to where I want it. Now, because I'm actually working on apexing the edge, or the apex of the edge, there's likely going to be a little bit of burr formation, which is just weakened steel, bits of steel on the edge. All I'm going to do to remove that is dramatically increase the angle, so I'll go up to around 35 degrees per side. Very light passes. And that'll put a very heavy micro bevel on the edge, which will remove the burr. Now, you can actually leave that on if you want. I prefer to back bevel it off. I don't really need a 30-degree micro bevel on my knife. So a couple of light passes. Should be done. So here we go. This is rather soft, requires a decent sharpness to cut, so you can see no problem. And that's the kind of edge I like to have on the larger blades. Even though you mainly do coarser and heavier chopping with them, I like to be able to cut this light vegetation when you want to. A lot of this stuff can be edible. When it's not edible, it's nice to use for bedding. It can be nice to use to cut in a hurry for smoke signals for your fire. just to create a lot of smoke in a hurry if you're getting insect issues. Lots of great use for it, and of course thatching for roofs and stuff like that. Your ultimate test is to basically find a little single piece like this, and it should be able to cut that with very little effort and without having to go to extremely high speeds. The faster you have to move it, the blunter the edge is. So you want it where again you can cut these patches of grass without having to move the knife at an extremely high speed, which is just fatiguing, and your chance of injury goes up. So nice relaxed passes, and your knife should be sharp enough to easily trim all these down. Even you, buddy. And of course your sort of obligatory little shaving test. So again, the reason that you're making this knife that sharp is not because you want to shave with it or you want to slice paper with it, but when you are doing finer work you will notice a benefit to that sharpness. Now the only thing that I'll say is don't really obsess about it. I mean, get the knife as sharp as you can, and that you're comfortable and enjoy the sharpening process. Don't struggle to try to achieve some high level of sharpness. It just makes it frustrating for you. I'm really coming to like this knife. I know I've had some problems with it in the past. I've had a couple of them that broke right here during some heavier work. This one seems to be holding up. It has a really nice combination of a lot of features and comes with a nice case, which is kind of rare actually for a lot of knives. A few things that I would like to change on it. This is too square. I mean, it's exactly really square. So when you're working up around this blade, working a bit forward, the spine should be rounded and this should be rounded off. It has far too much weight here in the tang. There's no really reason to have all that steel there. A lot of people get stressed about durability and don't want to partialize the tang because they're afraid the knife is going to explode. But the simple fact is it's very difficult to put any internal stress inside the tang. So I'd actually taper this out, reduce a lot of the weight, and then bring the grind up here. And the two of those changes would balance each other out in terms of heft. Remove some steel here, remove some steel here, so it would have the similar sort of rotational snap, but the blade would be lighter and the cutting efficiency would be a bit higher. In fact, I'd probably increase this to around 1/4 inch thick and put a full grind on it. That would actually still be lighter than the way it is here now, but it would have a much more efficient cutting profile, much more efficient wedge profile. I may in fact do that. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to modify the blade grind on this until I'm in a position to modify the handle, because if I take too much weight off the blade and don't take it off the tang, I'll end up with a blade that's too neutral and balanced, and I'll also shift the node points from the blade away from where they want to be, where they are now. So there's a node point here which corresponds to a node point here, which means you're very comfortable chopping here while you're impacting here. And if I removed a lot of the mass up here, I can end up shifting the node point back here, which is a foolish place to have it because you won't get clean cuts when you're chopping wood. The other thing is I want to wait until the fall where I can do some rather heavy splitting again in some cold weather and make sure that it doesn't fail right here. Once I have that done, I think I may take the handle scales off and do a full mod, enclose the handle and thin this out. Now the one thing I should say though, you can never say 100% that you're making a direct improvement. So when I bring the primary grind up, okay, I'm going to make it a more efficient cutting profile for harder woods, because I'll thin this out and it'll bite into the harder woods and it'll give me a smoother cut initially and a deeper cut. The problem is on softer woods I'll end up with something that wedges a bit too significantly. So it may simply be that Chris just likes this profile for the wood that he has in his area. And the other thing that you do lose is that these flats are nice for a lot of utility purposes. I just don't have that much use for them personally, but a lot of people do like them. These flats serve as a nice striking surface for hammering, both to hammer directly with, as in you're hitting the knife off something, or to serve as a small anvil. If you're working metal, fish hooks and that type of deal, or trying to make a fish hook out of something, a nice straight surface here to actually hammer on and work that a little bit can actually be kind of nice. Similarly for nuts, and even for grinding up, you know, flours and stuff like that, a nice flat surface is actually nice to work on too on each side. Quite frankly, for me, if I actually needed that and I had a full flat grind, I'd simply chisel out a piece on a log with the exact opposite of the flat grind, so that the top flat grind would actually be leveled again. It takes a bit more work, but I'd prefer the overall utility of a flat grind with heavier stock, and then enclose the tang. And I would make an argument that in general that would be a better profile. So increase this to 1/4 inch thick, put a high grind on it, leave this here as a transition grind, but cut it down maybe to about right here, so you'd have a full flat grind or convex, whatever you wanted, from here to here, then a transition grind, same angle, and then your final edge bevel. I'd argue that would be a superior overall grind in general. The other thing is, on a large blade like that, if you're actually going to put an area right here and argue that it's some kind of choil or whatever, I'd make it large enough for 2 fingers. And the reason I would do is on that is because generally with larger blades, when you're moving forward, you want to really shift the center of mass closer to your hand for fatigue. So if I was going to do this, which I normally wouldn't do, I'd put a 2-finger choil here. If I actually wanted to be able to choke up on this section of blade, I'd actually take this whole piece of handle and move it so that the handle went all the way out here. And you can see that on Kevlar's knife that I work with Dan on getting made. Because right now, if you grip on this up close for a choked up grip, you're gripping around this bare steel. So if you extend the handle all the way up here, you're gripping around the handle. And you can still, of course, obviously grip back here for more power, but then you got the handle all the way up here for more comfort. So minor modifications, but other than that, really nice. And again, a lot of these things are sort of personal preferences. I find this grip material a bit too slick. I'd like a nice bead blast, a very rough bead blast, even approaching a sand blast on the handle. That gives it a lot more texture, allows it to soak up a bit more fluids. So when you get sweaty or you're out in the fall and it starts to rain, you can get a bit more traction. And I like fully enclosed tangs. Again, I don't like bare metal because it transfers heat extremely fast, and when it starts to get cold around here, not having an enclosed tang can make me work with the blade without gloves on for a lot longer than I can without it. But really nice blade. I really like the drop shape. Really nice, really large handle that's comfortable even with gloves on. And for something that's made to be like, you know, a heavy use blade, the fit and finish on it is really, really nice. So there's no issues. While it's made to be a rough use blade, it's not finished as a rough use blade. So Chris did a really nice job with this blade. And of course, whether this is designed on or inspired by or sort of collaborated with, you can see that it's very similar to Lofty's blade in a lot of ways. The handle, however, is completely different between Chris's take on a handle and Lofty's. So, interesting knife.